Tonight, red alert. Iranian ballistic strike hits Tel Aviv. Israel faces explosive escalation.
They came in the dead of night, 300 federal agents moving like ghosts through the fog-soaked streets of Portland, Oregon. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when the first flashbang detonated inside the Crimson Warehouse on Southeast Industrial Drive. This is the story of Operation Nightfall, the largest cartel infiltration ever discovered on American soil. A network so deep, so systematic, and so perfectly hidden that it took 6 months of undercover work, encrypted surveillance, and international coordination just to see the tip of it. By the time federal agents understood what they were looking at, the Valdez cartel had already transformed an entire state into a fortress. A drug empire operating in plain sight. And the person running it? He was wearing a suit. He was wearing a badge. He was powerful enough that nobody dared ask questions. Let me show you how it started. The warehouse on Industrial Drive didn't look like much. Corrugated metal walls, no windows, loading docks sealed tight. But inside, agents knew exactly what they would find. 2 weeks of surveillance had confirmed it. This was a distribution hub, a command post, the nerve center of a regional narcotics operation that moved over 800 kilograms of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine every single week across the Pacific Northwest. At 2:47 a.m., FBI SWAT breached the south entrance. Flashbangs erupted in sequence. Concussive booms that shattered the silence and disoriented everyone inside. Agents in black tactical gear poured through the smoke, weapons raised, moving with surgical precision. They found 17 suspects inside. Some tried to run. Some tried to fight. Within 90 seconds, the warehouse was secured. What agents found next stopped them cold. Under the concrete floor, hidden in a reinforced steel chamber, they discovered 340 kilograms of pure cocaine vacuum-sealed in brick packages. On the north wall, a custom-built safe held $2.3 million in cash. Stacked, organized, meticulous. But the real shock came when they cracked open the server room in the back office. 3 locked filing cabinets, handwritten ledgers, encrypted hard drives, and a master list, names, dates, transactions, and something else. Something that made the lead agent, Special Agent Maria Gonzalez, pick up a radio and say 5 words that would echo through FBI headquarters in Seattle. We need to call higher up. Because the names in that ledger weren't just cartel members. They were judges. They were state police commanders. They were border patrol officers. They were city council members. And at the top of the list, in red ink, was a name circled 3 times: Governor Richard Ashford. By 4:15 a.m., simultaneous raids were happening across Portland. DEA teams hit a pharmaceutical distribution center that was actually a pill-pressing facility churning out 50,000 fentanyl pills every single day. ICE agents raided a chain of 7 massage parlors and discovered a human trafficking network moving undocumented workers between states. Workers who were also being used as couriers to transport narcotics. One team hit a luxury mansion in the West Hills where they found a cartel lieutenant asleep in a bedroom that cost more than most houses. Another raid struck a hidden underground casino operating in the basement of a Korean restaurant, where millions in drug money was being laundered through poker games and slot machines operated by corrupted city officials. The fog rolled thick over Portland that night. Agents moved like shadows. By sunrise, they had seized over 1,000 kilograms of narcotics, $8.7 million in cash, 43 firearms, and the lives of 17 suspects placed under federal custody. But the real breakthrough wasn't what they found at the scene. It was what they found on those hard drives. In a federal cyber forensics lab in Quantico, Virginia, at 9:32 a.m., FBI analysts began cracking the encryption on the seized servers. What emerged over the next 4 hours was a nightmare. A complete network diagram, shell companies, ghost corporations, offshore bank accounts registered to sham charitable foundations, a logistics network that spanned from Los Angeles to Seattle, digital breadcrumbs that traced money flows across 3 continents and back again to one central figure. They called it Operation Valdez Network. The Valdez cartel had positioned itself not as an imported criminal organization, but as a homegrown empire. Using the cover of legitimate businesses, a trucking company, a restaurant chain, a green energy grant administration firm, a nonprofit that claimed to help migrant families, they had built a system so sophisticated that it could move tons of narcotics through state lines without triggering a single alarm. Cocaine came through California ports hidden in shipping containers marked as agricultural equipment. Heroin was pressed into pharmaceutical pills at the manufacturing facility in Portland and distributed through legitimate pharmacy networks that the cartel had gradually taken over. Methamphetamine was produced in hidden labs in the Columbia River Gorge, protected by corrupt state park rangers who ensured federal environmental inspectors never showed up unannounced. Fentanyl, the deadliest drug in America, was manufactured in powder form and then mixed into counterfeit medications that made their way into high schools, college towns, and working-class neighborhoods across 3 states. But here is the thing about true power. Real power does not need to be loud. Real power needs silence. And that is exactly what Governor Richard Ashford had bought. The encrypted authorization keys found on those servers told a story of systematic corruption. Messages between Ashford and cartel logistics coordinators discussing convoy schedules. Emails from Ashford's office to state police commanders ordering them to shut down way stations on specific dates at specific times. Records of payments, substantial payments, flowing to judges who consistently dismissed drug trafficking charges against cartel-connected defendants. A pattern so clear, so undeniable, that federal investigators realized they were not looking at corruption. They were looking at command-level collusion. They were looking at a governor who had not been infiltrated by the cartel. They were looking at a governor who was running the cartel. Richard Ashford had served for 6 years. He had won re-election by 12 points. He had a wife, 2 adult children, and a reputation as a fiscal conservative who believed in law and order. In public appearances, he spoke about border security and the dangers of drug trafficking. Behind closed doors, he was architecting a drug empire that would eventually move enough narcotics to poison millions of people. The scale was almost incomprehensible. According to the financial records, the Valdez cartel was generating approximately $120 million per month in profit. Per month. That money was being laundered through restaurants, real estate, construction companies, and technology startups. Some of it was being sent back to cartel leadership in Mexico and Central America. But much of it was being reinvested into state and federal political campaigns, not to change policy, but to protect the operation, to ensure that Ashford stayed in power, to ensure that his appointed judges stayed on the bench, to ensure that his hand-picked police chiefs controlled the departments that were supposed to stop him. This was not negligence. This was engineered treason. At 5:45 a.m. on the morning of the second day of Operation Nightfall, federal agents moved on Governor Ashford's residence in Salem. He was asleep when they arrested him. He did not resist. He did not speak. He simply looked at the federal warrant, nodded, and asked if his wife needed to wake up. She did not. But that arrest was only the beginning. Across the Pacific Northwest, a statewide and regional eradication operation was already in motion. At federal command centers in Seattle and Portland, massive digital maps showed dozens of red markers pulsing across multiple cities and counties. Each marker represented a cartel asset, a drug fortress, a distribution hub, a money laundering operation, a corrupted government office. By 6 a.m., over 1,000 federal agents were mobilized across Oregon and Washington. FBI teams, DEA task forces, ICE units, specialized SWAT teams brought in from across the country, DHS investigators, U.S. Army National Guard units ready for rapid deployment if situations escalated to armed conflict. The operation had been named Nightfall, but what was about to happen would be the brightest, most aggressive takedown of organized crime infrastructure ever executed on American soil in a single coordinated strike. The first wave hit at 6:30 a.m. A cartel superlab hidden in an industrial complex near Salem was breached by 25 federal agents in full tactical gear. Inside, they found a drug manufacturing operation the size of a small pharmaceutical plant. 600 kilograms of cocaine in various stages of processing. Industrial-scale pill presses churning out fentanyl medications. Methamphetamine crystallization chambers still warm. Agents seized the facility in 40 minutes. 6 suspects were arrested. The equipment, worth over $3.2 million, was impounded and scheduled for destruction. The second wave targeted a mansion in the West Hills of Portland owned by a shell company. This was Cartel Lieutenant Marcus Reeves's residence and command post. Agents found encrypted servers, a weapons cache containing 47 firearms including 3 AR-15 rifles, over $4.1 million in cash hidden in walls, and a satellite office where Reeves coordinated daily cartel operations across 4 states. Reeves tried to flee through an underground tunnel that connected the mansion to a neighboring property. Federal agents intercepted him 230 meters from the exit. He was armed and did not surrender peacefully. The situation was resolved with minimal injury to agents, and Reeves was taken into custody. The third wave targeted a network of hidden drug tunnels near the Washington-Oregon border, in an area controlled by cartel smuggling operations. U.S. Army engineers, working with DEA and ICE agents, mapped and cleared 3 separate tunnel systems that connected to a massive distribution warehouse on the Mexican side of the border. Inside those tunnels, agents found 47 tons of raw narcotics, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl, staged for distribution across North America. The street value was estimated at $340 million. It was the single largest drug seizure in Pacific Northwest history. The fourth wave struck human trafficking transit houses in Portland, Tacoma, and Eugene. These were not simple smuggling operations. They were part of the Valdez cartel's integrated system, using undocumented migrants as forced couriers to transport narcotics between cities, while simultaneously profiting from their exploitation through labor trafficking and sexual trafficking. Federal agents rescued 83 victims. Some were minors. All were provided immediate medical attention, safe housing, and connections to trauma counselors and immigration advocates. The fifth wave targeted the corruption itself. This is where the operation became something darker, something that cut deeper into the fabric of trust and legitimacy. Federal agents, working with internal affairs divisions and the FBI, began arresting law enforcement officers who had been compromised by the Valdez cartel. By noon on the second day of Operation Nightfall, 43 police officers, state troopers, and border patrol agents were in federal custody. Some had been paid directly. Some had been blackmailed. Some had simply been seduced by the money and the power. A deputy police chief in Portland, arrested. He had altered patrol grids to ensure that cartel convoys would not encounter police checkpoints. A state police captain, arrested. She had shared raid schedules with a cartel liaison officer, giving them time to move operations and destroy evidence. 3 border patrol agents, arrested. They had systematically allowed migrant smuggling convoys connected to the cartel to cross into the United States without inspection, collecting $15,000 per crossing. A federal judge, arrested. She had dismissed drug trafficking charges against 47 cartel-connected defendants over a 4-year period, and had accepted $2.3 million in bribes disguised as consulting fees. 6 members of the state legislature, arrested. They had blocked or diluted drug enforcement legislation designed to target cartel operations, and had funneled cartel money into political action committees that funded their re-election campaigns. The betrayal was complete. The system had not been infiltrated. It had been redesigned. What agents discovered in seized communication logs and financial records was not corruption scattered randomly through institutions. It was a parallel enforcement system, a second secret police force controlled entirely by the cartel and directed by Governor Richard Ashford. This force existed to protect narcotics operations, eliminate witnesses, arrest honest officers who got too close to the truth, and ensure that the cartel's profits kept flowing upward. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez, the lead investigator, gave a statement at a press conference on the evening of the second day. She said, "What we are looking at here is not a criminal organization that infiltrated government. We are looking at government that became a criminal organization. And it was designed that way from the beginning." By the end of Operation Nightfall's first 72 hours, the numbers were staggering. Over 2,400 kilograms of narcotics seized across multiple states. $16.2 million in cash and assets seized. 180 suspects arrested, including the sitting governor of Oregon. 43 law enforcement officers arrested for corruption. 1 human trafficking ring dismantled. 1 cartel supply chain destroyed. The underworld took more damage in 3 days than it had taken in the previous 3 years combined. But the operation did not end there. Because when investigators began examining the full scope of the Valdez cartel's network, they realized something terrifying. This was not just a state operation. It was a continental operation. Zoom out from Portland and Salem, and suddenly you see the full picture. The trucking company that served as the cartel's primary transportation network had legitimate contracts with businesses across 15 states. The restaurant chain had locations in California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. The Green Energy Grant Administration firm had received federal subsidies and state support across the western United States. The supply routes connected to cartel operations in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix, Denver, and El Paso. The Valdez cartel was not just moving drugs through Oregon. It was moving approximately 1,200 kilograms of narcotics per week across the entire western half of the United States. Cocaine from Colombian suppliers arrived at California ports and was distributed north through Oregon and into Washington, then east through Idaho and Montana. Methamphetamine produced in hidden labs across the West was consolidated at the Portland hub and then distributed to every major city between Seattle and Denver. Heroin was processed into pharmaceutical pills and moved through legitimate pharmacy networks. Fentanyl, the most dangerous drug, was pressed into counterfeit medications that were sold on the street and in schools, killing dozens of people every single week. The shipping manifests were altered to conceal contraband. Way stations were closed for maintenance whenever cartel convoys needed to pass. Border crossing documents were forged by corrupted federal agents. Migrant smuggling was used as cover. Cartel operatives would hide in trucks with legitimate migrant families, making inspection more difficult and creating a humanitarian smokescreen for narcotics trafficking. Governor Ashford's role was not limited to protection. He had engineered something more ambitious. He was laying the groundwork to turn the Pacific Northwest, specifically Oregon and Washington, into the permanent continental headquarters for the Valdez cartel. He had positioned himself to win a second term. He was grooming successors in the legislature. He was establishing a long-term political infrastructure that would have kept the cartel protected for decades. Federal investigators found a document in Ashford's personal safe, a strategic plan dated 3 years prior. It outlined a 15-year vision: transform state government into a cartel-controlled apparatus, eliminate federal oversight through strategic appointments to judgeships and law enforcement leadership, expand operations into Canada and down the entire West Coast, establish the Pacific Northwest as a narcotics production and distribution hub that would dwarf any cartel operation in the Western Hemisphere. It was not a criminal plan. It was a governmental plan. It was the redesign of an entire state's political and enforcement infrastructure for one purpose: to serve the drug trade, to serve power, to serve money. When investigators realized the scale of what they were looking at, one senior FBI official said in a closed briefing, "We were not dealing with a cartel that had bought some politicians. We were dealing with a political apparatus that had become a cartel." But there is something important to understand about this story, something that makes it matter beyond the statistics and the seizures and the arrests. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Power does not always need guns and explosions and dramatic confrontations. Sometimes power only needs silence. Sometimes power only needs the quiet complicity of institutions that are too afraid, too corrupted, or too compromised to speak up. Governor Richard Ashford did not need to threaten law enforcement officers to turn them into cartel operatives. He just needed to show them the money. He needed to show them the benefits. He needed to show them that the system was already broken and that joining the operation was simply accepting reality. The fentanyl deaths in Oregon increased by 47% during Ashford's tenure as governor. In Washington, heroin overdose deaths doubled. In the smaller towns and rural areas where the cartel's products flooded in, addiction skyrocketed. Families were destroyed. Children lost parents. Parents lost children. Communities were poisoned from the inside. The financial impact was staggering, but it was not measured in dollars seized. It was measured in lives lost, in neighborhoods destabilized, in schools struggling with student addiction, in hospitals overwhelmed with overdose cases, in prisons filled with people struggling with addiction who had been charged with possession rather than treated as victims. And nobody stopped it. Nobody asked hard questions. Nobody wanted to know. Because the silence was profitable. The silence was safe. The silence was rewarded. This is the real danger of what Operation Nightfall uncovered. Not the existence of a cartel. The United States has always had cartels. Not the existence of corruption. Corruption exists in every system. The danger is what happens when corruption stops being random and starts being systematic. When it stops being an aberration and starts being the design. When a government, an actual government with actual authority, decides that its purpose is not to serve citizens but to serve the narcotics trade. Operation Nightfall broke that system. It arrested the governor. It removed the compromised officials. It seized the assets. It disrupted the supply chains. But the real work was just beginning. Because rebuilding trust in government institutions that had been deliberately corrupted is one of the most difficult tasks that exists. The Oregon State Police went through a complete reformation. New leadership was brought in from outside the state. Every officer was revetted. Policies were rewritten. Accountability structures were rebuilt from the ground up. The same happened with the state judiciary. Federal oversight was increased. Prosecutorial independence was guaranteed through structural reforms. It took years. It is still ongoing. And there is still the question that nobody wanted to ask in the months after Operation Nightfall. The question that sits beneath everything. How many other states? How many other governors? How many other political structures have been systematically designed to serve the cartel rather than the citizens? In the 3 months following Operation Nightfall, federal investigators initiated preliminary investigations into 8 other states. They were not making public accusations. They were following the same financial and communication trails that had exposed Governor Ashford. They were examining similar patterns of protection, similar shifts in enforcement priorities, similar relationships between officials and cartel operatives. They found evidence in 3 of those states that suggested comparable levels of systematic corruption. Not as advanced as what Ashford had built, but moving in that direction. Moving toward the redesign of government for the purpose of narcotics trafficking. This is not a story about a single bad governor. This is not a story about a few corrupt cops. This is a story about what happens when power and ambition and greed combine with the opportunity to redesign the fundamental structures of government. This is a story about the fragility of democracy when the institutions designed to protect it are deliberately turned into weapons against it. If you have watched this far, you understand that this is not just crime. This is political failure on the deepest level. This is the machinery of government being deliberately broken and repurposed. And it happened not because of external invasion. It happened because people within the system chose money and power over duty and democracy. Operation Nightfall exposed it. Federal agents, honest law enforcement officers, and investigators who refused to be silent brought the system down. But the larger question remains unanswered. How many other networks are still operating? How many other states are being quietly redesigned to serve the cartel? How many other officials are collecting payments while innocent people die? The Valdez cartel is severely damaged but not destroyed. Its leadership in Mexico and Central America remains at large. Its continental network, while disrupted, is finding new routes and new methods of operation. And somewhere, in some state capital, there may be another ambitious official wondering if the money is worth the risk. There may be another calculation being made, another infrastructure being quietly redesigned. This is the warning. This is the reality of organized crime in the modern era. It is not external. It is internal. It grows from within the institutions that are supposed to stop it. It flows through the silence of people who know but do not speak. It expands through the ambition of officials who see an opportunity and take it. Governor Richard Ashford is currently serving a 65-year federal sentence. He will die in prison. But his legacy, the systematic corruption he built, the government apparatus he redesigned, will take decades to fully expose and repair. And there is no guarantee that the same design is not being replicated somewhere else right now. If you are still watching, if you have made it this far, share this story. Tap like so more people understand how deep this goes. Comment your thoughts about what needs to happen next to prevent this from spreading to other states. Because this is not just about one corrupt governor or one cartel operation. This is about the structural fragility of our institutions and the constant vigilance required to keep them honest.